Hello, everyone. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Geo Trip. Me, Geo, and my lovely co-host, Dr. Hiron Prince, who's back from summering. We'll talk about his little cruise later, but let's actually welcome our guest, Akilah K. Alwan. Akilah K. Alwan, who goes by she, they, is a fifth-year PhD candidate in Earth System Science at Auburn University with a minor in Critical Studies in Education. Akilah recently received her MS in Educational Research, Measurement, and Evaluation from Auburn in May 2023, as well as a certificate in Program Evaluation. As a geoscience education researcher with a background in environmental and marine science, Akilah's current research focuses on the dynamics of racism, whiteness, power, privilege, and belonging in the geosciences. Her work engages theoretical frameworks like intersectionality, critical whiteness studies, and critical race theory to conceptualize how systems of oppression operate within the geosciences. In addition to their current work, Akilah has interest in supporting Black women, disabled women of color, and queer women of color in the geosciences. Akilah, welcome. I'm so excited. We are so excited to have you here at the Geo Trip.
Thank you so much for having me, Joe and Kieran. It's a pleasure to be here.
Akilah, there's so much we're going to talk about with you today. But before we can begin, I'd love to extend you the courtesy because we like to start our guests off by talking about or hearing a little bit about their geo story. So are you up for it? Are you ready to share yours? Perfect. Please let our audience know your geo story, like your beginnings and how you got here.
Yeah, so my geo story goes back to being a little kid. I was one of those kids where before my mom did the laundry, she had to empty my pockets because it was full of rocks and sticks and feathers and just anything that I picked up from outside. And I've always loved the environment. I've always loved nature. And I've also always loved travel. I went to an international studies high school, and my sophomore year, I went on a watershed ecology tour of Belize, which is a country in Central America, and I absolutely fell in love. And then the following academic year, I ended up taking AP Environmental Science, and it was just the most exhilarating class I'd ever taken in high school. Just in general, not even in high school. I was just absolutely captivated. I did really well on the exam, and I realized, because I was kind of at a crossroads at that time of like, what did I want to do in college? Because that's about the time you start thinking about, those things. And I decided I was going to be an environmental scientist. Originally, I was interested in the dynamics of ecotourism in the environment and how those impact each other, because that's a lot of what I learned while I was in Belize. And so that's what I decided to pursue. And I started my freshman year in 2015 at the University of South Carolina. I began as an environmental science major, and I was also planning to double major in marine science. I got to my very first day of class, which my first class of college, like the very first course, day one, was Marine Science 101. I sat down in our lecture hall, and I was so excited for class to begin. Like, I was like, I'm a real college student. I'm going to be, a scientist. And I turned around, because I always sit in the front row of my classes because I won't pay attention if I sit anywhere else. And I turned around just to see, who else was in the class. And I realized nobody in the class looked anything like me. There was plenty of women, but there was no Black women. There were just not really any people of color in general. And it occurred to me at that moment that I never really thought about who does environmental science or who does marine science. I didn't know any growing up, any scientists, any environmental scientists. And I certainly didn't do any research of what the demographics look like. I knew I was talented, and I got into the university because I deserved to be there. And that's all that mattered to me up until that point. But I just had so many complex emotions in that moment, looking at my classmates And I think many people would have been motivated to change their major because they foresaw what the next 4 years would be like in terms of being, the lonely only and being one of one in all your classes in your program. But for me, it actually inspired me to change my whole career path. So I desired at that moment to create a world in the geosciences throughout my career where no person ever felt like I did that day. No person ever felt like, wow, I'm really alone here and I don't know what I'm getting myself into. And am I qualified? And am I going to be able to do this? And so in undergrad, I started getting involved in geoscience education research, and then ended up pursuing a graduate degree in Earth System Science, but more specifically geoscience education research. And now I will say, yeah, I've really been able to make my mark on the field as an early career researcher, soon to be Dr. Alwan. And yeah, that's what I'm passionate about in the geosciences is creating a world where all that matters is I'm good at this, I like it, I'm passionate about it, and there should be no other consideration into whether to pursue a geoscience degree and career. And so, yeah, that's basically my geoscience story. I started as a kid with rocks in her pocket, and now I am an education researcher full time.
Just let me say first, you're such a great storyteller. I was just kind of riveted at the edge of my seat listening, waiting for what comes next. So how would you say, have you deviated from that initial decision to kind of switch your focus to education? Like, did you ever feel a pull to be like a more traditional kind of hard rock geoscientist, or did you really find your passion and stick with it all the way through to your PhD?
I realized I'm actually extremely talented in educational research and I'm good at it. I miss sometimes being out in the field, having occasional field campaigns. I don't think I was built to be like someone whose whole study and life's work is built and dependent on, multiple outing, multi-month field research. But I definitely do miss being out in the marsh. I really like coastal wetlands and just getting some sun. But I would say if really the opposite of regret or wishing that I had followed a traditional path, I've really doubled down on it. I have been able to take a heavy load of coursework in the College of Education in my degrees to the point where I actually have a minor certificate and master's in education outside of STEM. And it's really set me apart, I think, in terms of the geoscience education world, because a lot of folks who do GER, geoscience education research, and or DEI work in the geosciences, it's kind of a secondary thing for them. Or if they did, geoscience ed research in their graduate degrees, many folks did like hybrid dissertations. So they had some hard rock science and some education outreach work. And my dissertation is 100% education research. My priorities is 100% education research. I supplement my degree with geoscience classes, more traditional geoscience classes, but full-time education researcher. And I will say that's been very valuable because I am able to dive deeper into other disciplines like engineering, biology, computer science, physics. They all have, they're far more advanced in terms of their education research, specifically regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion. Even the educational theories that I use really enrich my understanding of the geosciences. And I think it shows in the work that I'm doing in my doctorate, and that, for example, exploring the dynamics of whiteness in the geosciences. if you read a lot of the things that are in the Journal of Geoscience Education, they may mention microaggressions, or they may talk about students of color, but around a framing of how can we make them more resilient. And I feel like a lot of the publications that are out there are really ignoring the elephant in the room, in that the geosciences are grounded in imperialism, grounded in colonialism, grounded in capitalism, and all of these things historically have excluded people of color, disabled bodies, queer people. And so if we're not acknowledging the origins, the roots of our field, I feel like part of the reason why, we all know the Bernard and Cooper Dock paper, no progress in 40 years. But I feel like what that doesn't get at is that context doesn't go back far enough. There's so many things that happen, particularly to Black folks, preventing us from pursuing geoscience degrees. If we think about, we weren't really attending many of our major institutions that host geoscience departments today until the 50s, 60s, 70s. And then, we have geoscience departments at HBCUs that were dismantled because folks were getting degrees, but they weren't able to be hired because of hiring discrimination in the 60s and 70s. And so all these things, all these contexts in my next couple of years, as I'm looking towards my next steps post-graduation, these are the things that I'm trying to highlight in the geosciences, because I think there's so much yet that we know. I think the wisdom is there. I think our elders hold that knowledge. But we need to translate that wisdom into documentation and publication so that we can reshape how we talk about justice and diversity in the geosciences. So short answer to your question is no, I absolutely am grateful that I chose the path that I did. And the possibilities are endless in terms of what's out there for me to learn.
Thank you so much for that explicit answer, and then the summary, because we appreciate a good summary here. I mean, you touched on so much within that response that I know we're going to get to, but I'm going to dial it back a little bit just for our audience members and kind of catch them up to speed in case they got a little bit confused or lost in the translation. So let's break it down, starting from like what your research actually is, and bring it to, or complete it with what you just said. Your current research, it focuses on the dynamics of racism, whiteness, power, privilege, and belonging in the geoscience. You touched a little bit on that in your geo story, where being in a class and there was no representation. And so that's kind of informed some of the work you're doing. Can you use a plain language approach to explain some of the theoretical frameworks that you're utilizing in your research and why? So just letting our audience members get a little peek at what you're actually doing, what are the frameworks that you're doing to bring this to the forefront, and why they're important, or why is utilization of these frameworks important?
Right. Great question. So I am a scholar critical educational theories. And basically, this means that I take a lens of, a good word is skepticism, towards power hierarchies or towards the way that our systems are structured. And so the primary theoretical, and what a theoretical framework is basically a body of scholarly knowledge that has been informed over time by thinkers and doers and research, and that is kind of a set of guidance that you approach a topic with. So, for example, one of my dissertation projects uses critical whiteness studies. The premise of critical whiteness studies is that race is a social construction, meaning racial categories are not inherently biologically different. We know scientifically that race is not between races, there are no significant biological differences. It's just a matter of phenotype. But we do know that race has real impact in the world, right? Because when we view each other, the way that we treat each other, the way we navigate the world is very informed by those phenotypes and how we are presenting to the world, right? And so critical whiteness studies specifically looks at how does the concept of whiteness or the white identity play a role in the power structures that be. So it's kind of in contrast to critical race theory, which is its parent theory, which also believes that race is a social construct, but that racism and race is also permanent. We can't look around it. There is no, I don't see color. There is no, I can't engage with you without acknowledging the dynamics of race, because rooted in all of these things, rooted in race, rooted in racism, is those histories and the inequities and disadvantages that we have faced over time that lead us to our present day context. So, for example, when I mentioned earlier no progress in 4 years, and specifically about, Black geoscientists making up around 1% of all degrees awarded in geosciences, we have to think about the historical context of racism that Black people have faced in the United States, in the world beyond the United States, that have prevented us from having equal access to education, have given us socioeconomic disadvantages, even, segregation of swimming pools for a majority of the 19th century. Black people not being able to swim in many ways would put them at a disadvantage to pursuing geoscience degrees, because they are so centered around outdoor activities and water in many cases for marine scientists. So again, that's a disadvantage to consider. And we have to understand the greater historical context. And so by studying whiteness versus race, I'm looking at those who arrange the power structure, right? So the geosciences have historically excluded people of color and other marginalized groups. And that was done under the intention to protect the interests of white individuals, right? Because if we think about, in the context of the United States, like Manifest Destiny, the westward expansion, and fossil fuel exploration, gold exploration, all of these things benefited white male landowners. And so we kind of have the origins of our field, at least in the American context, situated in those things, and those histories of benefiting white male landowners continue into our history today. And so that is why I'm trying to take an approach understanding the structures of whiteness in the geosciences. How does whiteness and the power of the white identity impact where we are today? Because I think that is what's missing from the topic. We can talk about how to make people of color and other marginalized groups more resilient. We can talk about how to give them more exposure, in K through 12. We can talk about how to introduce geosciences and other introductory courses, even in undergrad, to try and recruit majors, maybe by piquing interest. But at the end of the day, again, if we don't address the elephant in the room, which is ingrained racism in our field, in our discipline, and all of the micro disciplines, and the histories of that racism, we will never get anywhere. We will continue to recruit people. We will not retain people, because that attrition, that loss, because of those feelings that I felt when I first started college, of being the lonely only, and all of the hardships that you face due to this ingrained racism, it just makes the degree and the career not worth the trauma that I know many folks who have left for other things have faced, and again will continue to face if we don't understand what changes we need to make and what is driving these things. I think we've really been trying to solve the problem from the wrong end, is what I would argue.
So, Akilah, this is a relatively new way, like a new framework for looking at things, right? And we know that new things don't always go over very well. How has your experience been in the geoscience community? Have you found that they've been receptive to using a framework like this? Or are we kind of just reflecting the rest of society and being resistant to looking at things through this new lens?
Yeah, so great question. I think it's really been a mixed bag for me. I think as I've grown in my confidence and knowledge of what I do, I think it's helped people be more confident in me. Within the geoscience education research community, I think the reception has been great. I think a lot of what has kept us from venturing into these avenues up until now is what I mentioned earlier, that many folks don't have as an in-depth of education training as I do. So they wouldn't have had access to courses. Like I've taken courses on intersectionality. I've taken courses on critical race theory. So I really have had a deep dive into the theoretical underpinning of these things. And I think, that has really helped me. I think there's definitely folks who are capable and interested in doing this work, but just don't have the means to receive that education. In the greater geoscience community, a lot of people are excited to hear about my work and to talk about my work and to see the outcomes. And there's also this tension between hard rock scientist and myself, in that I'm a qualitative researcher, and there's this desire to see what I'm studying backed up by numbers. For example, I had an encounter one time where an elder in the community was like, as a scientist, how are you gonna back up this work by numbers? How are you going to use statistics to support your research? And I responded, as a scientist, I use storytelling, and that is my metric of authenticity. Stories are not anecdotal. Lived experience is just as valuable as data, as statistics, as numbers, as data points. And actually, I would argue that in some ways they are a stronger form of data, because when I'm interviewing folks, I recognize my positionality, which is how I relate to them and their identities and my research, and how my identities shape my view of my work. But at the end of the day, I can only interpret what folks are telling me. And there's also many quality controls in research that I do to ensure that I am really authentically describing my participants' stories. But I can't put words in their mouth for them not in doing good research, not in doing ethical and proper research. Whereas many folks like to still hold this view that data is without bias. Data is just numbers, and the numbers tell us what they are, and that's just that. But we know that statistics are very much shaped by the beholder, those who are doing the statistical analysis. In many ways, you can make numbers, meet your objectives. We think about racism in AI software and facial detection software. Those are ingrained biases from numbers and computers. I think what I would love to see happen in the geosciences is more adaptation of the recognition of how researchers identities and biases shape the research, both in quantitative and qualitative research, but that like we are not separate from our work. Who we are and our lived experiences very much influence our research. And so I think that is the biggest point of tension I've had in kind of my growth in my network and meeting folks is just qualitative work is just as exceptional and storytelling is valid. And this too is geosciences, because there's just kind of this feeling that I'm not really a geoscientist, but I am doing work in the geosciences, just a subsection of the geosciences. So yeah, that's definitely a challenge, but not one I'm shying away from.
Akilah, thank you for so eloquently framing that for us. A moment of silence and a round of applause simultaneously for those of us pushing for the formalized recognition of storytelling and the lived experience as a data set, because you're right, it's valuable. We need to think about those who live in marginalized, underrepresented communities. We need to think of those who were there first, like our indigenous peoples. The fact that they have these lived experiences that could help when we are processing data. So before we switch gears, I would love to acknowledge the numerous financial awards that you have received for this work, because this type of work, this frontier research, it's not possible without funding. I want to, along with acknowledging it, I want to ask you if you don't mind sharing with our audience, for those of us who are graduate students or early researchers, just some advice in how to find awards for this non-traditional research, or what were some of the tips and tricks that you utilized? Because we know the almighty dollar is what allows us to take these risks.
Yeah. So I have been awarded a National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship. I was also a University Corporation for Atmospheric Research Next Gen Scholar, Southern Regional Education Board Doctoral Scholar, as well as other awards. And I will say my biggest tip is dedicate time. If you are interested in scholarships, interested in fellowships, undergrads or grad students, dedicate time out of your week, out of your month to searching for funding opportunities, scouring Twitter. I find opportunities there. Your institution's database. If you have a fellowship office, make an appointment there. So that's my first piece of advice. My second piece of advice is really value your beyond the classroom experiences, because today a degree is not enough in terms of employment, in terms of scholarships, in terms of internships. Folks really want to see that you have leadership experience, that you know how to apply what you're learning in class to real world scenarios, that you know time management, that you're self-motivated and taking on extracurriculars, taking on research if you're an undergrad, taking on, really any type of involvement that is related back to the geosciences, to diversity, equity, and inclusion, to outreach, to science communication, shows so many more talents than just a good GPA or just publications. I think that has what has set me apart in terms of being so successful with scholarships and fellowships and funding. And even beyond that, as I've built my professional network, because I have been involved in so many things, it's given me legitimacy with many folks, and they trust me. So I have mentors who have invited me, to, write projects with them, although they are not really, without really knowing what my writing capabilities were, because my presence and my accomplishments and my dedication to the work that I do spoke for itself? Or, do you want to, join our grant team and learn skills and we can train you on how to write a proposal? All of these things have come from all of the work that I have done outside of the classroom. I would say actually what I've done in the classroom is probably outside of the quest I had to learn more about education research methods. My inside the classroom experiences have been the smallest piece of what has helped me. And so really, I would say my two biggest pieces are spend time searching, applying. And once you get in a rhythm of applying, you kind of have, I would say, you find your story, you find what your spark is, what your passion is, what your purpose is. And you kind of get in a rhythm of knowing how to play the application game. And then, really engaging outside of the classroom in experiences that are going to make you a stronger professional, a stronger person, and set you apart from your colleagues.
Fantastic. So aside from working on your graduate research, which I can imagine takes up so much of your time, and all of these kind of extra balls that you've been juggling, you also have managed to parlay all of these out of the classroom experiences into your own consultancy. What can you, or would you like to share with us about that?
Yes. So this past year, I founded the Alwan firm. It is an all-in-one place for diversity, equity, and inclusion, engagement in the geosciences, program evaluation, speaking engagement, supporting students, and mentorship, kind of a broad reaching agency is what my goal is. But because I got my program evaluation certificate earlier this year, I have been working on a couple different projects nationally, engaged in National Science Foundation sponsored projects, as well as other things involving diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it has been very fulfilling. I will say being a business owner and a graduate student is definitely challenging. I actually was just announced a few weeks ago, I was accepted into the American Association for Colleges and Universities Convergence Accelerator program. So they have basically an entrepreneurship, small business startup support program for women of color, specifically in STEM. And so I'll be working with them over the next year to learn how to really make my business stand out and, all the ins and outs of being a business owner. And if I would say to any listeners that are interested in pursuing consulting, whether it be through a program evaluation or diversity, equity, and inclusion, I would say a couple things. One, find mentors. I definitely wouldn't have been able to do these kind of things without folks who believed in me and were not just mentors, but sponsors. So thinking about me when I wasn't in the room, people who were willing to take a risk on me as an early career researcher. I would say specifically if you're interested in program evaluation. And for those of you who don't know, program evaluation is basically the either evaluating a program or grant or class or initiative, either ongoing or kind of post-program, evaluating whether that program met its objectives or what can be improved, or using data to create curriculum or workshop. There's a wide variety of program evaluation. What I specifically do is a lot of evaluation for sponsored projects of National Science Foundation or government-funded nonprofits facilities, helping them evaluate the progress of their projects. For program evaluation, I would specifically recommend looking into formal training because it's a lot to learn on your own. I know more and more institutions are offering program evaluation certificates, graduate certificates. There's even options to get certificates if you don't have one at your university. You can work with other universities. Definitely the training has helped me a lot. I feel much more equipped to do the things that I'm trying to do because I have the training. But I would say all it takes is 20 seconds of courage to take on something that's scary or something that's bigger than you've ever done before. And, life is a learning experience. Learning comes in all paces, forms, colors, and shapes. So if starting a business, starting a consulting agency for whatever your interests are is what you want to do, go for it. Don't let not being, still being in school stop you. Don't let finances stop you. There's a lot of options out there for grants and, supporting, different groups in entrepreneurship. Also, find mentors and sponsors who can help you get to where you want to go. Because that's the biggest thing I would say has made the difference for me, again, is having folks looking out for me and wanting to work with me. Yeah, it's been a really enjoyable process. I'm excited for the future of my business. And I'm excited to see where this takes me. I've got a lot of things on the horizon, and I'm just ready to be able to devote more time to them once I finish my degree.
Well, thank you so much for sharing with us about your foray into consultancy and all of that information, all of that amazing information about your business, the all one firm. I mean, you inspire me daily. We don't get to talk daily, but whenever we catch up, it's always a fun time. And so I just want to thank you overall for sharing with us today here on the Geo Trip about your Geo story and how you were able to navigate and weave into this beautiful journey of becoming an interdisciplinary geoscientist. You wear the cap of environmentalist, you wear the cap of advocacy, you wear the cap of geoeducation, a researcher. You're just so multifaceted that I can't help but smile. And I know Kyron's also super excited and smiling also. So we're really glad you're able to pop in with us today. But as you know, because you've checked out a couple of our episodes, and viewers, or listeners, clearly I am manifesting us actually becoming a show. But listeners, as you all know, we've reached the end of our segment. And because we here at the Geo Trip believe in balance, aside from the technical and aside from the great advice and shares, we like to share a little insight about who our guests are as a person. And so we are now at the hot potatoes segment of this recording. Are you ready, Akilah?
Yes, I am.
I'm so glad you are. So, first question. Which superhero first comes to mind that best describes you?
Probably Superman. The notoriety, being able to fly, doing it all, and definitely a weakness. I have weaknesses.
Are you saying your wife is kryptonite? Is that what I just heard?
Yes.
All right. So, if you weren't a scientist, what would your dream career be?
Oh, I would want to be an artist. I've always been an artist, and I think I would love to get back into art someday.
Amazing. I definitely identify with that. So, team podcasts or team audiobooks?
Podcast.
And on that note, what are you currently listening to?
My wife and I really listen to it through her. but she likes these two different British podcasts. One is two guys and the other is two girls. I don't remember the name, but they're hilarious. And they're all Black Brits, and it's just a good laugh. They storytell. Oh, I think the two girls is Closet Pod. I think that's what it's called. And they just get together for confessions in their closet, basically. And it is a time. It's all storytelling.
Man, I'll definitely check that out. The only thing I've watched British recently is Top Boy. Just finished binging. But last but not least, audience, for those of you who haven't picked up on it, Akilah is an avid traveler and she loves her and her wife, respectively. They love food. So Akilah, if you had to be one, which one would you be? Breakfast food or dinner lover?
Oh, I am big time breakfast person. Big time. I would eat breakfast 3 times a day.
Hey, Akilah, you are such an inspiration. I literally don't know how you manage it all, but kudos to you. Having you on this episode to talk about your research and how we should be interrogating, the geosciences and examining that history and how it has shaped where we are today has been an eye-opener for me. And I know it will pretty much be the same for most of the people that listen to this podcast. It's been a pleasure. So I know that there's so much more that we could have talked about today, and just know that you have an open invitation to return. We know that you're going to go on to do big things, so don't forget about the little people. All right, come back and talk to us. We'd love to have you back sometime.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed our talk today, and I would, of course, love to come back.
We love amplifying our colleagues and their amazing professional and social accomplishments. And as we close out, please let our listeners know where they can follow you or get in touch with you if they'd like to.
Yeah, my Twitter is, Twitter is a dying art, but my Twitter is Akilah Alwan. It's my first and last name. You can also follow me on Instagram at my new academic and professional page. It is Adventures of an Academic. I will begin to start posting content there about my travels and networking and projects and all the things that I've been able to do over the past couple of years in graduate school. And then, if you have any business inquiries, you can reach me at Akilah at theallonefirm.com. And that's all ALLONE, all one. And if you want to reach me personally, probably Twitter is the best way. Yeah.
Akilah, thank you so much for sharing with our listeners how they can contact you, reach out, and keep up with you. Listeners, on behalf of Dr. Prince and myself, thank you for tuning into another episode of the Geo Trip. We will be back next month with another exciting installment. But until then, you can also follow us on Twitter at GeoTrip Podcast, and we're counting down to our website launch. Bye.